Okay, cool. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us. For those of you that don't already know me, my name is Sarah James. I'm a senior recruitment consultant at Transition Partners. So I'm based in Berlin and look after recruitment for the German market. And at Transition Partners, we run a lot of different events. I think some of you have been involved in them before, but if you want to check out any of these events, we have them all on our YouTube channel. For the last year, they've mainly been virtual. And today we'll also record the event and share afterwards. So if anybody doesn't want to be on camera, keep your camera off. But we thought it would be nice if those involved do have the camera on, if they're happy for it to be recorded, to make it feel like more of a roundtable setup. So Ilya is going to kick us off. So I'll hand you over to Ilya.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ilya. I'm working for Taxfix, and it's really a pleasure being here. So this one is going to be about engineering culture, specifically Innersource, as one of the kind of big chunk of practices and patterns we inherited from the open source community. And we started implementing some of those practices at Taxfix. And I'm quite curious to learn about what other people do in this area. That's why we basically call for a roundtable to maybe share some of this knowledge and potentially learn something new. And for those who never experienced that and just considering this, I think it also will be useful that you can avoid some mistakes that others made and maybe bridge the gap between where you are and when you want to be. All right, so I suggest we start with the quick introduction round. I want to ask you to, of course, introduce yourself very quick, but also share a little bit of context where you are in at the moment. What's the size of your organization? Is it a startup? Is it a big enterprise? What's your tech landscape? Is it based in cloud? Is it on-premise? What kind of languages do you use? Is it more client-side application? Is it server-side application? Whatever. And yeah, maybe a little bit on your journey so far with Innersource. So if we can follow the structure, I already give a little bit about Taxfix. I kind of want to add a few points there. So we are at Taxfix. It's a mobile app that one can use to file their taxes in Germany. So you can basically do all of this tax filing, and we taking care of the all heavy mental load of your shoulders and of your head. We are around 300 people. Engineering is around 70 people at the moment. We're quite lucky when it comes to Innersource. We have one common language we speak. It's JavaScript. We use it for frontend and backend, and that makes basically this interaction and collaboration very easy because everyone just speaks the same language. And we started with this approach pretty much from the very beginning. We did not know that it's called actually Innersource. We just started to maybe do whatever makes sense for us. And then we realized that actually there are many people doing the same and call it Innersource. That's been our journey so far. Right, maybe I will just go in the list of the participants. So the next one, I think it's Yvette, right? If you don't mind giving an intro.
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Yvette from Contentful. We are a few hundred developers at this point. Started out as a startup, probably not anymore, but still has the same feel. And basically, I don't know if at least my team doesn't work with Innersource. But at the previous company I was working for was Marcis, and their our main repository or legacy application was essentially free for all. So anyone could touch it, anyone could modify anything. This came with its own drawbacks, of course. And for the microservices, basically, teams owned them, but they were only reviewing code if someone else had to add something. And that, of course, came with the value that any team could, they didn't need to ask for help from each other than a couple of small reviews. So that's my experience with Innersource. Although as Ilya has said, we didn't know that it was called Innersource. We just went with it.
Nice, thank you. Krzysztof, you want to go next? I don't know, not sure if you have much to add.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, I think Ilya has said plenty about Taxfix already. I'm Krzysztof. I'm an engineering manager there. I'm mostly in charge of the QA team and the testing process, but that has a lot to do with everything that Ilya is going to talk about in a moment. Yeah, happy to also get involved in the conversation.
All right, thank you. Mark, you want to go next?
I work for Lab Bible Group, which is about 350 people now. We've got only about, it's very small development team, about 10 people, 20 people in tech as a whole. I look after all the tech. I also worked for Sky before this, and I was looking after about 65 to 70 people there. So I've got a bit of experience dealing with small dev teams and large dev teams. I've not really heard of Innersource that much, so I'm interested to get to know more about it, to be honest. So that's why I'm here.
All right, thanks. I hope you'll be able to learn something. Max, you want to go? Okay, you probably do you have anything relevant to share?
No, I'm all ears today. Work alongside Sarah, so yeah, all here to learn about as much as I can about Innersource. So yeah.
All right, then we have Mike. Hello.
Hi, folks. Hi there. I work for BGSS, which is a consultancy, and we have our own standards. We're quite into sort of agile, our own methods, but we're basically consulting. We go into all the clients and we generally fit into how they work. So right now I'm working on a project which is very much not open source, is not inner source, very protective of their own code and technologies, for quite surprisingly conservative as well. But sometimes we're also working with clients which really want to change the way that they are. So, you know, moving to a cloud, moving to much more open source situations. But yeah, right now, probably almost the opposite of Innersource, someone who really is almost like just afraid of even taking anybody else's code or frameworks, just in case. You've been burnt a few times, but quite an unusual attitude.
Oh, will be also good to understand your experience better. All right, thanks.
Cool.
Natalie, you want to go next?
Sure. So hi, my name is Natalie. I work at Wayfair, which is an online e-commerce platform for home goods that is in 4 markets at the moment: the US, Canada, Germany, and the UK. In contrast to many of the people who've already spoken, we're an engineering group of 3,000 people in a company of around 17,000 people, including our warehouse staff, which actually itself presents some really interesting challenges around Innersource for us because we are so big. In my own team, I'm in a team called Development Platforms, and we are the bridge between software and infrastructure that is really helping our software engineering and product teams get everything they need from our infra group to be able to actually achieve velocity and deployment and what they're working on. I specifically look after open source at Wayfair, and so my, I guess, inclusion in this conversation is really from the main open source front, but at the same time, our inner source work is something that has been really fragmented and really stagnated because of our size, because of our different business priorities, and also because of this huge undertaking that we're currently taking on, which is a big bout of decoupling our monolith, which is PHP based, to service-based architectures that actually are going to vary between Java, Python, Go, and hopefully no other languages, because that's all we're supporting on the platform at the moment. But yeah, we have a lot of big technical work ahead of us, and Innersource is something that we have definitely begun with implementing our own version of code owners internally, but it's something that is still really could use a lot of improvement for us given our size and given the huge technical work that we're actually about to and currently undertaking.
Wow, all right. Very diverse group so far. Really good. Thanks, Natalie. Payman, you want to go next?
Yes. So hi, my name is Payman. I'm the CEO of the House of Creative Entrepreneurship. We are something like a very small venture capital company. So we build different kind of startups by ourselves, or we help others. My background is in the startup scene. So for the last 15 years, I worked in different kind of startups, prop tech industry, IT and AI solutions. And there I was usually responsible for the product or the IT department. We used a lot of different kind of methods, often very oriented on agile concepts. We also never called it Innersource, but I guess there are some overlaps. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this kind of interaction with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Raja, I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Hi everyone, I'm Raja and I work for, do you see me?
Yeah, no, we cannot see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Raja and I'm joining from as a product owner for business products and services from Internet Stores. We are a company working in the outdoors and bike segment where we are offering in online and offline e-commerce solutions. And so I am working on projects where we are trying to decouple also the same story, decoupling some old monolith solution into different services. And we've worked so far with Kubernetes. But to be honest with you, I'm a little bit far from the development area, but I work closely with developers and I hear them speaking a lot about Kubernetes. I never heard them speak about Innosource, so this is why I joined this call, to learn a little bit more and discover and hear what the others are doing.
Cool. I hope yeah, you can find some answers to your questions today.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Vladimir.
Hi everyone, Vladimir from Home24 here. So Home24, it's a home and living e-commerce platform. We are mainly represented in Europe and Brazil. Currently, we have probably around 1,000 employees, and somewhere around 100 are IT specialists. Yeah. So our main tech stack is Golang and TypeScript. We are not that lucky as Ilya to have just one. Yeah. So I would say we are also rather young in the Innersource. We also did some of it, but never called it. So pretty common as everyone here. Yeah, so that's pretty much of the intro from my side, I would say. Anything
All
I
right.
missed?
Thank you, everyone. I think I now have a little bit of understanding what this group consists of, like people with different experience. I struggle to find like a common question, common topic that we can discuss as a next step, but I think the most logical one would be, I know that there is right now some standardization going around in the Innersource community, and I know that there is like a big group of around like a little bit less than 1,000 people who are like working proactively and defining and describing like the best practices. Does anyone really use any of those patterns and practices like as they are written there, or is anyone at all aware that this kind of thing exists? No, anyone?
Well, depends what you call them. If it's about having maintaining team, documented code and tests and such, well, of course, I guess pretty much everyone does that. But what do you mean by those?
Okay, so maybe then let's change it a little bit. So I would ask you, maybe give you a few examples of practices that people use, and everyone can maybe also share the experience. What of this list kind of they use actually? So what usually helps and what is described there, like just a few examples. For instance, RFC is a pretty standard process that widely used everywhere in the open source world. Stands for request for comments. Before you're making like a big change in your code base, or like you want to split monoliths or whatever, changing contract, you usually trigger this process. You write a document outlining the problem trying to solve, potential solutions, the approach you want to take, and then ask people to review that and give their comments. Another one would be having a CI/CD installed like in a very common way it goes a little bit towards DevOps, but I think it's also like a good practice that you have a contribution guideline in your repository. You can easily set up the DevOps environment and it's all automated. Another good practice would be a little bit on the product side where people actually working with teams while defining their business requirements, they leave some room for the code to be created in a way that it can be reused, like as a library or like as a microservice. So those are the 3 examples. And yeah, please give maybe some examples of those practices that you guys use and you think that are like very beneficial for you and your business.
Actually, then you mentioned it, I guess I have something to add here. So when you started with RFCs for changes, we also do employ ADRs. I'm not sure if this group is familiar. So it's basically architectural decision records. So it's not really a request for comments, but it's already documented. We way to document the architectural decisions, which are impactful. Yeah. So in those documents, you shortly describe which decision did you took, what were limitations, what did you try to solve, and what are the side effects, and what should be followed from now on in the project. So basically, then you have someone new come into the project, it's quite easy for them to onboard because they have this list of ADRs and they are usually like data lined, and some ADRs can supersede others, so it's not necessarily set in stone. But then you basically have pretty quick look into how the project evolved over time and what kind of conventions, and especially important, why those decisions were made. Yeah. So we found this super useful.
So that helps basically to get like onboarding, and also if you have like multiple microservices, so someone from other part of the organization can quickly understand what's going on in specific service, right?
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay, cool. Very good example. So Natalie, I believe you have tons of those kind of things in place already.
Yes, maybe too many, because we are so big that folks, I guess a lot of teams or organizations maybe create sometimes their own small kind of microcosm of these kinds of things. But we at Wayfair definitely do a lot of RFC work, specifically because we actually have quite a lot of I guess if you could call them guilds, working groups that we have around specific topics, so that we are including and making sure to include a lot of different folks across our organization in engineering. And so out of these working groups, RFCs are actually a huge way for us to actually even float a larger, architectural decision or roadmap that we are trying to push that is actually going to affect more than one department overall. Like, for example, in our own team here, we actually put out an RFC to actually test waters whether a platform group specifically supporting Python is actually something that would be needed and valued and so on. And actually coming out of that, there's quite a lot of guild work going on around command line tools being set up to be able to spin up new Python applications and so on, to actually address the needs of the larger Python community within our teams. So we do a lot of that. We also have a platform guild, we have a microservices guild, and working groups around all the different programming languages that we use. Also a front-end platform team specifically as well, that actually supports all of our front-end devs who are mainly using React. So we do quite a lot of that. I would say we are still not set in stone in terms of, and I nitpick about this sometimes, the processes of, let's say, for example, where RFCs should exist. I'm a big fan of, we use GitHub Enterprise. I'm a big fan of keeping all that in GitHub Enterprise, but of course, we also are a G Suite company where we use Google Docs, and these are sometimes hard to find and hard to resurface, let's say, after decisions are made later down the line sometimes. But it's an interesting way of collaboration overall with the comment system there. So yeah, RFCs is a big one for us, and the working groups. I would also say, I mentioned before, and for those who aren't familiar, we also have something here at Wayfair called Code Owners, which is actually something that exists for GitHub, where you can assign owners for different parts of code, and then those owners are automatically requested for review when someone opens a pull request to modify that different area of code. So that's not something that we let's say, went over too easily, but it was a solution where we realized that there are a lot of people working on very similar problems, but they happen to be in different product spaces. And so being able to actually share that knowledge through code owners has been really great. And we've been able to track quite a lot of Innersource contributions through actual code owners here within Wayfair, which has been really great.
Nice. And I'm not sure if you've been like with the company for a very long time, that you like saw like the very beginning of that. So maybe you can share with us like how it was initiated, overall, like maybe first practice or you introduced as a company.
Yeah, I was here, but I was actually in another team. It was technically our larger team that introduced it, but I wasn't actually in this team when that happened. And I will say that when we introduced code owners, which is quite, I wouldn't say always specific to GitHub, but very much a GitHub related process, we actually were using GitLab. So it was an interesting kind of thing to introduce on top of something that wasn't actually so sticky, but at the same time, it was our first way of trying to understand that even though we are super monolithic, it is really hard to navigate actually a lot of code internally, and that this was going to be a first step in actually part of navigation, not just contribution. And then this is something that it was really hard to actually push. I believe, Vladimir, you actually mentioned something like, everyone, does tests, or, that isn't something that we as an organization that brings in folk that's been around for 17 years, that brings in folks like the university, wasn't always something that we were hard on. And so this is actually something that pushed us to actually better our own engineering practices, which is why it was so hard, because again, habits die hard. So I think that's something that I would say we're still ongoing in actually making code owners something that absolutely everybody uses. I wouldn't be able to tell you that it's across the board at Wayfair, again, with 3,000 engineers, but at the same time, it is now easier, and now that we've actually moved over to GitHub, and actually the integrations are much easier, and it's more so integrated in our workflows in a really natural way for what we're using. So yeah.
Nice. For the rest of the group, you guys using any of those practices in your companies?
I've not really seen it other than sort of more natural processes. I know what interests me is, Natalie, you spoke about sort of people owning the code. Is that certain areas of code assigned to people, or do people sort of naturally grab it? Because it sounds, to me, I see always a risk of people getting quite precious about the code. So when, are people looking at to saying, I'm protective of this code, or are they the ones who always want to change it? I've worked in both situations.
I think that's a really great question, and it's definitely both. There is, we talk the actual process being called code owners, and us wanting just generally as a cultural kind of necessity for people to have ownership over the work that they're doing. It a little bit conflicting in the actual process of assigning someone outside of your team, or maybe like outside of your project, to actually review your code. That's really the basis of what code owners is trying to do. But at the same time, it was a way for us to break some of those barriers between different product organizations where, for example, we have our transportation space that deals directly with how goods that we sell are actually transported to customers, versus in the storefront space, which is what we call our front-facing website and apps, who are selling products to customers, and they're actually having a lot more touch points with customers before they buy, and also with suppliers. And so how can people working in those two really separate spaces have access to code that actually could be useful for both? And that was something that just the exploratory effect of implementing something like this made a lot of folks realize that they don't need to be too protective of code, because actually sharing something may actually help them later, because when the customer has already bought, it comes down eventually to transportation, so to speak. So it was a really interesting kind of aha moment of, I don't need to be working on this alone. Someone could have done this already, which saves me up to innovate elsewhere. That's, I think, the huge benefit for us overall, more than any kind of code we've saved or whatever. It's really that innovative kind of mindset that we've been able to open up a lot more.
Cheers.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, maybe other people. Mark, Payman, Christoph, Yvette, Raja. You have something to share? Yeah.
No, not really.
We used also similar kind of concepts like RFC, ADRs, DevOps, DevSecOps principles and stuff like this. Especially the reusable code was also something important for us. But what we didn't do is that it was really like strict or bureaucratic. So it was really a natural process for us. So sometimes we just have a meeting instead of writing a complex document down and share it with different people. It was somehow a very natural process for us. So we didn't have this strict rules around that.
Yeah, I think it works this way, like in a small organization, that you just, you know, pretty much everyone, and you can,
yeah.
If you want to implement something, you just talk to 5 people and you have it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier. Which leads me to my next question, but like maybe let's finish this round of like existing practices that someone is using and find them very helpful. Anyone from else? I think Yvette, you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say that, like, for us, similarly, we didn't have this kind of process around changing things. When it came to the legacy app, anyone could just do whatever. Obviously, we didn't have much fear of eroding the code because it was already eroded to the point where it's unfixable. So it was mostly just trying to integrate things into the existing spaghetti. But for the microservices, it was really just a quick meeting. This is what we want to do. And then the other team would give some input, and that was it. And if you think about it, it's an RFC, it's just a meeting that is replacing the RFC.
Cool. All right. If there are no other comments, I would suggest we move to the next topic. Like I wanted to also discuss, and it's more like for people who would like to maybe adopt some of those practices, is how do you start? So maybe some best tips, or like if you like the best, of course, if you'll share your own experience. Like, yeah, we did that, but actually did not quite work out very well. So we did it another way, and that worked really well. Yeah, maybe this question will go to more experienced people.
Well, I can start probably. I wouldn't call myself more experienced person here, but can share where we are in the journey now. Yeah, so we are running now on the microservices landscape. Let's say before we also had monolith, and with microservices, this code ownership, which Natalie mentioned, is a bit easier because like it's one code base, one service, and pretty much team owns it, right? So for us, the point where we understood we need to have some kind of collaborative effort on the project ongoing is then we had a central piece, which is GraphQL in our case. Yeah. So the central API, which serves requests for the web frontend, for mobile applications. So this part, which is as soon as you have change in not really any other, but essentially you have change in the downstream service and you need to expose it to the consumers, you need to change also this part. So of course there are different approaches like schema stitching and such, but sometimes it's just basically necessary to do the change in the GraphQL service itself. Yeah, and we found out that this team starts to become a bottleneck. Yeah, so every time you introduce something in the down layer of the service, you need to change also in GraphQL to expose it. So basically what we did then, we set this GraphQL project for the, now we call it Innersource model, but basically what we did, everyone can contribute. There is still the maintaining team, which guides it and runs it. But we did set up clear guidelines on how to contribute to this project, how to do the changes. Also, what we find super helpful was to have the bootstrap document. So how do you set it up from the scratch and start developing? So this was super useful for us. So basically, I would say our journey to this Innersource and started from identifying the points of interest for multiple people to contribute, for multiple teams to contribute. And GraphQL is not the only part which is like that. I have some other examples, like, I don't know, central repository of widgets, of templates, which are used on the web front by multiple teams. So there you need to have some consistency, and you want to build on top of others, yeah. But this for us was the trigger moment to understand that sometimes you can't just scale efficiently unless you have this methodics.
And I know that when you're trying to inner source like component that used to have like a very strong code ownership in the past, usually like a lot of reaction from the team, like, hey, now I'm actually the one who's responsible for running this code in production, and there will be some changes coming to my repository. How do I make sure that, you know, I will not be impacted? That's a subconscious kind of subconscious fear that we need to deal with. Was there anything like that? How you solved that?
Definitely, there was and there is. I mean, we do prefer, of course, you build it, you run it, and this is where we pretty much Home24 teams are built around this concept. For those shared things, how it works for us, we found very useful to have early alignment with the owning team, because in the end, review is done by the owning team, and owning team decides if the PR is ready to be merged in. Yeah. So only then they are satisfied, and this pretty much any open source concept, you do have maintainers, which says yay or nay. Yeah. So should you proceed work in the PR or not? So basically, that's how we built this, broke this protection layer. So yes, you run it, but you also have a huge say on saying if it goes in or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one solution. Maybe Natalie, you can add something to that?
Yeah, I would say I really agree on the idea of like trying to find ways that other teams and engineers in general can contribute to others. I think that like just the parallels with open source there, specifically in like looking more at upstream contributions versus trying to actually mine for contributions yourself is something that we try and push just culturally overall. And so having something like code owners makes that search easier, for example. We also have at Wayfair groups of reviewers for the different programming languages that we have, that are like a pool of people where you pass a certain proficiency test, and then you're added to a pool of reviewers, so that anyone who wants a review that maybe is outside of this code owners organization, or maybe within, but chooses to use that as an extra mechanism of, this is someone comfortable with reviewing, you know, a certain amount or certain kind of complexity of code. They can pull from that reviewer list, and it'll just randomly assign somebody, so that there's this idea of the engineering community outside of just your own team going in to review each other's code, and you can actually track a lot of that. So we try and push folks to actually join a lot of these reviewers groups, and we have them for all the languages that we use. And this is something that is super helpful in terms of just getting, you know, teams unblocked in terms of needing review, but it's also something that we use as a way to actually, oh, we see you're doing a lot of reviews here, are you interested in contributing more? And so getting those folks involved in, you know, jumping into, you know, other code bases that might be tangential to theirs, you know, on the product side of things, and being able to help and find collaborations there. Those review groups have been super helpful in helping us, because of the sheer size of our organization and how easy it is for all of us to become very siloed. I wouldn't say that we've solved that yet. There is still a long way to go, but creating command line tools to spin up projects, you know, that are containerized, that are decoupled from the monolith, so that people can play around and then add those kinds of effects, is also something that we are currently trialing at present, and we've got some really good results at the moment in contributions there.
Okay, and back to the question, like if you would start, how would you do that? Maybe some suggestions, some learnings, do's and don'ts.
It's a good question. I have a lot of don'ts that I don't want to start with, as opposed to do's. I think there's a lot that you know, Innersource is basically open source, but with one main closed door to the outside world, right? So that's how I like to often describe it. And so I think looking at, I think there was a lot of mention, I think Payman, you mentioned that this idea of we naturally do certain things. I think the way that I would start a lot of official Innersource work is actually making sure that you're documenting how you actually want that to take place, because that goes back into onboarding becoming easier. That goes back into being able to say that on top of it being natural, it's actually a standard of yours, and here it is documented, and this is how we work. And I think that's something that is going to help then anyone make sure that they are adhering to what naturally your team is choosing to do, and what that you're choosing to actually put up in terms of processes around Innersource. So I think actually documenting exactly how you want that to take place is a really great first step.
Yep, completely agree with that. Any other suggestions from more experienced people to probably someone who's just starting with that in this journey?
I mean, I suppose one thing that popped into my mind when particularly Vlad was talking about the request for changes, etc. Do you ever have to refer to anything such as sort of standard patterns, architectural principles, or limitations within your own organization, just to refer to ensure that you're still sticking to those standards? Because when it comes to review, somebody's going to come and say, have you looked at this, you know, the operationals or the non-functional requirements, etc. Is there a standard for when people template, not just what they're changing, but how it still fits into their organization principles, etc.?
The same way as I described, basically. So we do have those owners of the services, and they maintain, and they're responsible for running this application, and by running, they're also responsible for maintaining KPIs at certain thresholds. Yeah, and then non-functional KPIs are also part of it. So as long as owners of the service, and this is where there's, I would say, a big difference between monolith and microservices, because the scope of the service itself is way smaller, so it's way easier to maintain the homogeneity of it, let's say. So we didn't really had problem of application going too far from where it should be, yeah, let's say, just because of the efforts of maintainers, and again, the scope is small. So this is where microservices really benefit from the size of it and from responsibility of it. So it technically didn't deal with the problem you described, I would say. We didn't have it.
Cheers, that's a good answer. I mean, I think that's one of the big benefits of microservices, when you can just own it from top to bottom. So, you know, you're not sort of beholden onto sort of a wider set of people with certain standards elsewhere.
Yeah, actually, now when you said it, there is one problem with microservices. Is basically we do have, let's say, standard template of how to quickly spin up the application, where you have already built in CI, CD, linters, deployment, and whatever. And naturally, this template evolves over time. Yeah, but then you need to either spend some efforts on keeping the old applications which were built with early versions of template up to date with it, or you just live with it. Yeah. So this is, we didn't solve this yet on how to do that on the scalable way. But so far we just go with the flow in a sense. So if this application doesn't hurt, and if, for example, it still uses like old deployment mechanics, but it just totally works, and we just leave it. Yeah. But at a certain point, it starts hurting. And what we have now, we have one dedicated team, so-called scaling. So what guys do, if we do have some critical part of the landscape, some service, maybe several, which are already too late in the adoption of the new practices, they just come in as the ambassadors to the teams, do the changes, and then educate the team who owns the service on the new way of doing stuff. Yeah. So for example, I don't know, we are quite big on AWS, and lately AWS improved a lot, like Fargate service. This is a service for running containers, serverless. Before there was another ECS way, so where you do maintain your own cluster yourself. So now we prefer to go Fargate, and before applications were running on ECS. So what guys did, they basically redid the infrastructure part and the deployment chain for those services which were still using ECS, and basically opened PR for the owning team to review, get familiar, educated, and then that's how we solved it.
Nice, very nice solution. Okay, Yvette, Payman, Raja, do you have something to share on the do's and don'ts while you're implementing Innersource in the organization?
Yeah, there was one thing, like, I mean, it's not concrete on Innersource. It was more or less like whenever we had changes, like culture-wise, technology-wise, and stuff like this, we really started to do things small and step by step, because especially when you have a bigger team, it can have a huge effect, and you don't know in the beginning if it works out or not. So what we did is I choose 2 or 3 people who are really into that kind of topic, and enabled them and gave them everything what they need to be successful in that area. And other people saw that at some point, and then they started to adapt in that direction too. So that was also somehow how it grew up naturally, also culturally wise. So I was never the person who told them exactly how and what to do. It was more about, okay, we are all skilled, we are all intelligent enough to find good solutions. Let's get together and find something how we want to work, because I think there's no clear concept about how each team can work. It's always somehow individual. But it was really step by step. So starting small and then making it bigger if it works out.
Yeah, that's actually 100% aligned with what the Git book of Innersource Commons is suggesting, is to run it as an experiment. Yeah, you go step by step, you take small, and yeah, that's how you got there. All right, anyone else? Yvette, Raja, Christoph, maybe you can talk about our journey.
Any good advice here, because we were already working that way. I don't know, I didn't see the adoption phase. It was just how we worked. So I'm not sure if I could give any valuable advice.
Sure, I can jump in, share a little bit what happened with us. So the need for Innersource kind of surfaced when we were growing quite massively. Over the last 2 years, we grew in size and changed the way that we're working very, very much. And we evolved from having one team working on a specific project or a specific repo to having 7 teams contributing to the same thing. So it was very organic to for us to, well, we had a need on our hands and we had to fix it. How do we make it so that everybody's empowered to contribute, but also balance it out with still being able to deploy in some reasonable time, with sufficient quality and so on. A lot has been said about experimentation already. Obviously, taking it step by step is very essential. What I would add on top of that is complete and full transparency with everybody why we are considering these solutions, and also bringing up these hard conversations very openly, mentioning what we are trading off in going this way as opposed to a different solution, and then coming back, evaluating how that went, iterating, and that's what made it a success for us.
Thanks. Right. Any other last points on this theme and this topic? And otherwise, we move on. I have another one. Okay. Okay. So the next one I would like to maybe discuss is probably relevant for Raja, I think. So sometimes I've seen there is, in different companies, there is a conflict between like product management and engineering as different kind of initiatives. So product managers not necessarily understand what's the value of having that. So it actually takes a lot of effort. Of course, it can be solved through like a good communication early on and get their buy-in, and then work with them together. But in some cases, you might end up in the situation that you're actually already doing a lot of these things, but then product managers don't understand the value of that. you ever experienced that? And if yes, what was your solution?
Well, actually, we didn't have that problem per se, because the monolith solution in place was so business critical that we had no other choice than if we want to refactor, if we want to rework our solutions, then we're going to have to choose, let's say, a way or a philosophy. And there, our culture is that each one is expert in his domain. So the engineers are best to know what works best for them. So they came up with this idea, and then it was practically not even discussed. And for me as a product owner, they explained to me in 2 sentences, and I was like, okay, if it makes sense for you, it makes sense for me.
Lucky there, and lucky you. Good match.
Yeah.
Maybe anyone can share like a little bit more hard case?
I think I've had a lot of bad experiences in the past. Probably when you get a product owner who is more of a business person and their focus is not on anything you're doing in IT. And I think my experience has been, they come in a quick change. How quickly can you do it? How quickly can we get out? And they're basically backing you continually into the corner to do the quick fix, a hack, whatever. And that works well for a while. And then after a while, it gets harder to do the changes. You've got a lot of technical debt, and it starts coming back up to the product owner, because the next time they ask for a change, you have to say, well, we can't do this because unless we do this and this. And so I think unless you can get that balance right, it's really probably having a good relationship with a product owner, or a product owner appreciates it. And from what I've heard today, a lot of you people have really good relationships or better ways of working, but I've really been bitten in the past where you basically silo your code further and further, and you're building up legacy. And it basically, instead of like building up a piece of code or systems that are going to go on forever and ever, you just drive them into the ground. And I think that's probably the hardest thing, sort of getting that relationship right and keeping your technology alive, keeping your technical debt going.
One thing though is that it was not the product owner really that we had to convince in the organization, but rather the management itself. So because I heard, I'm like 10 months in the organization, but I heard that there have been a lot of tentatives to reach out to the management and say, we need to refactor the old solution because we as release engineers are not understanding that much anymore. But actually the argument by just coming and saying, we refactor because it makes sense, didn't get them to go. 3 years after, it's only because there was a business risk and we could quantify the business risk and explain if we don't do it, what's going to happen. Yeah, that was the only thing to convince the management. Otherwise, I heard, but I didn't experience from my colleagues that previously they tried to reach out for refactoring and building services and breaking down the monolith, but it didn't that much succeed. I don't have background how it was done, to which extent, what's the link with the business, but I heard that it was a really hard discussion that was disregarded.
That's often been my experience, particularly if you're dealing with a maybe non-technical business manager who's looking for sort of maybe it's revenue targets that they're interested in. So yeah, the long term maybe isn't in there what they want to do.
Yeah, for us, luckily, we could link it. We could find the right use case to link it to our ambition for growth and saying, okay, if we want to grow by, we have an ambitious target of 30% per year. With our legacy monolith, we're not going to make it that far. And if we look into all the issues that we are having today, from stacking over time a lot of pieces of code with different logics and no clean mapping, no clean documentation, no clean approach for it, then we have one developer who left the company and worked on it for 10 years, but we don't know what we do with it now. So the discussion, I think, was, again, I was not there, but it was oriented this way. It just didn't tick the right buttons for management to say enabler for growth is that, or faster service delivery, or whatsoever, those fancy words that management needs to hear and needs to understand in order to justify such an approach.
That's also very interesting that it feels that you need to get to a certain maturity level as an organization before you can actually start driving those initiatives. Like you need to bring this understanding. And I think maybe Payman, like you being in like working in like this venture space, you probably had to do with a lot of like hard, tough pitches that you need to make. Maybe some suggestion from your side?
Yeah, I had in the past a lot of issues in that direction, to be honest, because like the gap between management and IT or product and IT is often very, very big. So cross-functional teams can help a bit at least. So to have a different kind of understanding about what these engineers are doing. But I didn't find a final solution for that. But I think it is very important for everyone who's working on a technical product, on a software product, to at least understand a bit the technology behind that. Not in all details, but take a look at all the big players like Amazon, Tesla, Facebook. All these leaders have engineering background. Mark Zuckerberg is originally an engineer. Elon Musk is an engineer originally. So these people have really background in that direction. I'm pretty sure they don't understand fully, completely in all details how their product works. But this kind of, to close this gap from both directions, from the engineering side to go and explain what exactly is happening on the technical side, but on the other side also to be open-minded on the product side to try to understand what kind of topics the engineer team is busy with, because it's super complicated sometimes.
Yeah, I can identify, I can relate at least to that, because one big impulse comes from our CDO, who is very much at least has a tech background, is too much into agile organizations, understands how agile organizations work, is trying also to implement the more or less an adoption of the Spotify model. So I relate to that. And now I tell that, okay, maybe one difference, not only in the argumentation about why we need to do it, but also the management behind it. It's true that he's there for a year, and I think he has a good understanding, and that probably helps. But how many of those profiles you can have in the management today?
Yeah, that's true. It's rare.
Actually, from our side, we do have also a couple of points how we solved it. And like current solution we do have at Home24, each team has 30% of time to spend on the tech topics. That's it. So like PMs just have projects have teams for 70% of overall time, and how this 30% is spent is for teams to decide. And we don't really need to have you don't need to explain this. Yeah. So this is agreement on the company level, set within our CTO, and that's it. Yeah. But another important point, which I think was mentioned several times, how to convince the management is speak their language. I mean, if you want to do some tech debt, shoveling, some restructure, you need to explain why you want to do it, like what kind of benefits business will get out of it. Either it will be speed increase or reliability or something, because otherwise we just want to do it because we want to do it. Yeah. So as Payman said, sides need to speak one language here. Yeah. And one metaphor which I actually find super helpful and appealing to describe tech debt is basically shoveling forward. Yeah. So, and it really helped. So when you stand in the snow and then you are not, then you are moving forward, you're shoveling the snow in front of you all the time, in front. So every time you move forward, you're moving slower and slower and slower. So this is basically what is tech debt. So it's not some delayed debt, but it's really something which slows you down over time. And this kind of language I found like business just understands. Yeah.
How did you do it to have this very high share of time to spend on research, discovery, and learning, and these 30%? How did you get there?
There was the moment where at some point in time we were quite slow with delivery because of the accumulated tech debt, and we had and have good CTO who understands how it is. So he pushed one project to get rid of it, which took some months, let's say, to restructure how we work and also the architecture side. But after that, we immediately saw the increase in speed. Basically, we got out of it. So then it was on the board level, like, okay, that's your budget, basically. Tech budget, 30%.
Wow.
So how he get it internally, I can only guess so far, but that's how I see it from my side.
Okay.
I think the brutal reality is that engineers do spend those 30% doing their engineering stuff, but it's disorganized. So every company has it. If you don't have the organizational kind of organization to structure that work, it will be very inefficient. So people will still spend those 30% of their time, even more, on those kind of fighting those kind of issues, but it will be highly disorganized and very inefficient. I think that would be my perspective to that.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. Because at the end, if you could just split, whether you have one ticket in GLA for something, or you have a split between research and all those engineering issues and the actual solution to your problem, you could easily quantify and say, okay, we got it anyways. It's just, that's a nice approach to it.
I think it's also interesting to note that it's not just an engineering issue, it's a business issue if you've got a lot of tech debt. I think that's the actual clincher in terms of speaking the management's language, is idea of if we can't deploy as quick as you want, then that's actually your problem as well, not just us as engineers. And I think that's also something that in terms of achieving velocity for engineers to be able to deploy faster, convincing product folks give us a couple of sprints to be able to fix a couple of things, and all of a sudden feature work goes up 3x. That is something that is, for us in Wayfair, has worked really well, on top of actually aligning the organization, reorganizing it so that all product, or data science, all software engineering, all infrastructure goes up to the CTO. There's no separate product organization. Everyone has the same boss in the end. So that has been something that, at a larger company that is still going through a lot of those problems, that's been really helpful for us to actually say.
Really nice. Okay, just conscious of time, I think we have maybe time to answer last one question from someone in the group, maybe from less experienced, or people who might have still open questions. Please shut. No? All right. Then we out of time. I really enjoyed the conversation today. I learned actually quite a few things, and I wrote down them for myself. I hope you learned as well. And yeah, thanks for participation.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining.